his asceticism. Now, this is really incredible. This is why I love St. Joseph so much, because his whole life is just so, so inspiring and so incredibly amazing. And even his asceticism, his sense of self denial and asceticism is incredibly and jaw dropping. And so let's be edified by this as well. Shed blood, receive spirit. In other words, we got to exert much, much, much self denial, much forcefulness in our ascetical fiats um, in order to receive the grace of God in abundance, to be benefited from the grace of God. So let's look at this. And this is contrary, completely contrary to the worldly man, to the hedonist who wants to live a life of comfort and ease and, you know, barely do any hard work, right? Just rely on AI and technology and my robots and all the rest to do all the work, and I'll just sit back and sip on my my coffee and do nothing, right? No, that's not the attitude of an Orthodox Christian. An Orthodox Christian is one who is industrious in laboring for God, one who embraces the pain of asceticism because no pain, no gain. You don't want to suffer? Then don't expect to be freed from your passions, St. Joseph says. So let's look. What did he do? Francis struggled against the old man, meaning he resisted the sinful, lackadaisical side of our human nature. He resisted that. He fought against it. Francis struggled hard. He fasted strictly. He kept vigil. At night, he stood upright or kept walking. In this manner, he pushed himself as much as his human nature allowed him to in order to resist sleep. Once he managed to remain standing for 8 days, 8 days straight without any food, water, or sleep. Can you imagine? Once Francis decided to remain standing all night in prayer for the sake of asceticism. He didn't sit down. He didn't lay down. He was standing all night. All night. He remained standing and motionless for 12 hours. Can you imagine this? Standing completely still for 12 hours straight. No sitting, no moving, no nothing. While keeping his nous from wandering away from his heart. How did he do that? By constantly saying the Jesus Prayer. In order to accomplish this ascetical fiat, he devised a special kind of cane that was shaped like the letter T. You see this sometimes in the icons of him. By leaning on this cane, he was able to remain standing the entire night, praying both with and without his prayer rope. He even tried tying a rope to the ceiling and passing it under his arms to help him remain upright. One day, after many days of fasting and all night standing, he fell down out of sheer exhaustion and hit his head. Hours later, when he regained consciousness, he could not figure out why his head hurt, while his oil lamp was broken with its oil all over the floor, and why his cane was not in his hand. After fully coming to his senses, he realized that he must have fallen asleep while reading Compline and knocked down the oil lamp beside him. Who knows how many sleepless nights he had had? He struggled hard against sleep. Why? Because he saw in practice, pay attention to this is very important. He saw in practice that no asceticism brings as many blessings as deprivation of sleep for the sake of prayer. I want to repeat that. He struggled hard against sleep because he saw in practice that no asceticism brings as many blessings as deprivation of sleep for the sake of prayer. Sleep battled against Francis throughout his youth on the Holy Mountain. This battle tired him, especially during winter, since it was too cold for him to fight sleep by going outside. The warfare was not just from the natural desire to sleep, but also from the demons who despise vigils with noetic prayer. Many times he and Father Arsenios would do prostrations barefoot in the snow to overcome their drowsiness. Look at this self denial, folks. This is incredible. When he would reach the limits of exhaustion, grace would strengthen him, and thus he would continue his fearsome struggle. He encouraged people to keep a tight schedule so that they would always make time for prayer and their spiritual duties. Otherwise, the demons would find holes and cracks in the soul as a way to capture them. In letter 46, for instance, he wrote, "Force yourself also in your spiritual obligations so that the enemy does not find an opportunity to ensnare you." This is just so amazing. Look at how much he pushed himself to pray all night long as much as he possibly could, and how he found every way possible to, to manage that, to make sure that he would stay. He didn't give up. He didn't back down. He didn't, look at himself and say, "Oh, I'm in a little bit of pain. I'm going to sit back down now and I'm going to rest and I can't do no more." No. He forced himself. He kept going, pushing, fighting, struggling valiantly. You know, this is the spirit in which we should be practicing the faith, the manner in which we should be trying to live the ascetical life. The ascetical life is for everyone, not just monks and priests. Toss that ridiculous idea out of your mind. The ascetical life is for everyone. We're all called to be fasting, to do prostrations if we have the physical capacity to do night vigils, to pray for several hours, to stand upright in prayer rather than sitting down, you know, to exert ourselves, to push ourselves, to challenge ourselves, to embrace the pain of ascesis, because it's through and in the pain that we're going to receive the grace of God. No pain, no gain. You don't want to exert yourself in asceticism, then don't expect to receive the grace of God. And don't expect to be freed of your passions. It's really that simple. That's exactly, I'm paraphrasing St. Joseph himself. That's not my own opinion. That's him. Francis also fasted strictly. He would eat so little food that people today would not believe it. Every day he would eat 3 ounces of rusks, dry bread, after 3 p.m. Both he and Father Arsenius wanted to eat only bread and water during the week, and only on weekends to have a little food with oil, such as a little boiled wheat with lemon or a spoonful of butter. They were strict about fasting, doing it with great self-denial. Much later, they made this form of asceticism more moderate. Although they ate only Although they ate out of little plates, they held only a few spoonfuls of food, and they would eat bread and other food, and even if fruit if they had any. They ate a variety of foods, albeit in small portions, so that they would not have a high opinion of their level of asceticism and had the temptation to judge others who fasted less than them. St. Joseph used to say, "For a man to obtain freedom from the passions," pay attention to this, "for a man to obtain freedom from the passions, his flesh must rot, and he must not take death into consideration." In other words, it takes tremendous self sacrifice to obtain freedom from the passions, tremendous amount of self denial and forcefulness. He was very careful to preserve the schedule of eating only once a day so that his stomach would not encounter irregularities. He knew that this would disturb his bodily peace, which in turn would disturb his peace of soul, and he would suffer great damage, especially in his prayer, because he'd be distracted by the pain. That is why he did not keep the customary 3-day, the Trimeron fast, at the beginning of Great Lent. Instead, when night began to fall, he had some tea and ate a little bread or rusks, dried bread. In this way, he had moderation and discernment in everything. This is so important. I want to pause here and make a comment here. So the first thing is, again, as you're seeing already in his ascetical life, how strict he was, how forceful he was in his ascetical exercises, right? Forcing himself to pray for 10, 12 hours, right? Forcing himself to do thousands of prostrations, forcing himself to only eat a little, even though he was really hungry and thirsty and weak, forcing himself to deny his flesh. Why? Because it's in and through the asceticism, it's in and through the deprivation that we are being purified, we're being purged, we're being cleansed of our passions, of envy, of anger, of pride, of lust, of gluttony, etc., etc., etc. As we like to say on this channel again and again, no pain, no gain. No pain, no gain. In other words, as St. Joseph says in one of his other letters, if you don't want to suffer, as a Christian, if you don't want to undergo deprivations, if you don't want to struggle mightily against your passions, if you don't want to fast, if you don't want to do any of these things, right? If you just want to live the easy, comfortable, you know, life, then don't expect to be freed from your enslavement to the passions. It's really that simple. And this is precisely why St. Joseph the Hesychast is a saint, because he put the gospel into practice. He fasted. He did prostrations. He prayed. He fought against the passions. He denied his flesh. He repented. He lived the ascetical life. And we're all called to asceticism. Again, let's emphasize that. We're all called to asceticism, not just monks. We're all called to be ascetical. If you're not practicing ascesis, you cannot really call yourself a Christian, because asceticism is the backbone to a Christian. Without asceticism, you cannot grow as a Christian. You cannot progress. You cannot fight. You're not fighting. That's the problem. You're not fighting against the old man, the fallen man, the sins, the passions, the vices. You need ascesis. You need ascesis. We all need ascesis. But let's not get carried away and take things to the extreme and do that mistake of zeal not according to knowledge, as St. Paul says, where we take our ascesis to such an extreme that we're on the verge of dying. Like, that's not blessed. The saints are very clear on this. And if anyone wants the patristic writings on this, I've been collecting them over the last few years for a book that I'm writing. I have a whole chapter talking about this, about what St. Joseph says here: discernment in your ascesis, moderation in your ascesis, right? On the one hand, we need to avoid laziness, negligence. But on the other hand, got to avoid the other extreme, which is overdoing it, going to the utter extreme and, you know, fasting so rigorously that you're being hospitalized. Like, that's not blessed. That's not benefiting you. You're defeating the purpose. And more than likely, the reason why that happens is because you're becoming vainglorious with your ascesis. You're becoming prideful and arrogant and judgmental in your ascesis. You're becoming a Pharisee, right? Lord, Lord, I'm glad I did, I fast this much and I give this much money to the church and I pray this much and I thank you. I'm not like this man over here who just sits on the TV and eats potato chips all day long. I'm better than him. No. So this is exactly why it says St. Joseph and Geronda Arsenius, his co-struggler, would pull back a little bit. And, in their strict asceticism, so that they would not be judged. So that they would not judge others who were living less ascetically than them, right? So that they would not have a high opinion of themselves. So they wouldn't be prideful. Because the moment you entertain the pride and the arrogance and the boasting and the vainglory and the Pharisaism and all the rest, that is when all of your ascetical fiats get tossed in the trash can and burnt up and have absolutely no value, have absolutely no benefit to your soul. You've wasted your time and energy. Just think about that. What a shame that would be. There are some ascetical people, monks including, who during Great Lent, they notice that they've been super, super, obedient to the fast, and they start feeling a little bit of pride. And so, in order to cut that out, they'll break the fast. They'll go have some dairy. They'll go, have some oil, whatever, to humble themselves. Because it's not just about fasting that's important. That's important. But it's how you fast. Are you fasting in the proper spirit? Right? Are you fasting with humility, keeping your eyes only on yourself and not looking at your neighbor, right? Mind your own business, as the saying goes, right? Fasting is a means to an end. It's a means of purifying your soul, going deeper into compunction, repentance, and all the rest, and learning to have control over your body rather than being enslaved to your body and your bodily desires. Let's not treat fasting as an end unto itself. That's also a mistake. So we got to be careful with all of these things, folks. Right? We got, and this is exactly why it says in the book that Yeronda Joseph was so wise and discerning that he recognized that not everybody's the same. Not everyone can fast and pray like he did. Not everyone had the physical constitution, and that's why he would actually relax some of the fasting for his disciples. He would allow them to not fast as strictly as he did. He would allow them to do that. There was one time when I think it was Elder Ephraim of Arizona who got very sick because, look at this. This is a perfect example. There's a moment when Elder Ephraim got so physically sick from the intensity of the fasting and the evening vigils and the work and just constantly like putting all this stress on the body that he was almost about to die. And I think I might be mistaken. He almost caught tuberculosis, or maybe that's someone else. Forgive me if I'm mistaking the narrative. But anyways, he got super sick to the point of death. And they were actually preparing for his funeral. Like they actually thought he was going to die because he was so thin, so small, so weak. And they're like, you're probably not going to bounce back from this. And it says that Saint Joseph allowed Elder Ephraim to have meat. Now, that might be a shock to some of you because monastics, they give up meat for the rest of their life. But this is exactly the point I want to drive home, is that Saint Joseph, and this is what Elder Ephraim says in the book, had discernment when to employ strictness and when to employ an exception to the rule, to relax the rule a little bit. Because again, if you go to one extreme or the other, it's no good. Doesn't do you any good. Doesn't benefit anyone. So you have to have discernment. You have to have moderation. And this is why we have a spiritual father, a spiritual guide, who's looking in from the outside, examining things, and through the enlightenment of the Holy Spirit, etc., is able to guide us safely in the, spiritual life. Right? Don't we all have doctors and physicians and, gym trainers and this? We all have a bunch of guides in our life. Why would it be any different in the spiritual life? That's where we need the most guides. So there's an attitude that some people have like, oh, I don't need a spiritual father. No, you do. You need a spiritual father more than you need any other kind of guide in your life. Right? Precisely because you don't want to fool yourself and fall into these traps of delusion and pride and arrogance and all the rest. And many times the spiritual father is able to see that because you're blind from your own passions, your own egotism, and he's able to look in and see, wait a minute here, right? And guide and correct you accordingly. So.
Επιλαθάνου πόσας τας ανταποδόσεις αυτού. Τον εδηλατεύοντα πόσας τας ανομίας σου, τον ιόμενον πόσας τας δόσους σου. Τον ιτρούμενον εκ θανάτου της ζωής σου, τον στεφανού